Continuing our study of the book of Job, last week we looked at Job chapter 29. Chapter 28 in the book, Job talks about the pricelessness of wisdom. And then in chapter 29, Job begins to recount how his life was lived out of that understanding of what true wisdom is. So in chapter 29, we get a glimpse into the life of Job before the discussions of chapter 1 and chapter 2 in heaven. And as we looked at Job, he talks about all that he did. And on the face of it, it looked and sounded a little bit arrogant. We have a lot of I's. I long for the months, I went to the gate of the city, people saw me, the old men rose to their feet, and so forth. But what he is relating is that he had learned the lesson of wisdom. And out of that wisdom of fearing the Lord and shunning evil, which almost is a quote of what God said about him in chapter 1 and chapter 2 to Lucifer, Job noted how he then carried out his life. And one of the sections we touched on was verses 12 through 17 of how that in that passage, and it's a beautiful little passage, how he rescued the poor who cried for help and the fatherless who had none to assist him. New International Version, by the way. The man who was dying blessed me. I made the widow's heart sing. I put on righteousness as my clothing. Justice was my robe and my turban. I was eyes to the blind, feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I took up the case of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the wicked and snatched the victims from their teeth. And that's just a part of how he lived. That was what he saw as his obligation as being a follower of God. But we also looked at, as we moved into chapter 30, especially verses 1 through 10, Job now, I'm thinking about a passage that I quoted up there that Paul quoted in Colossians. But Job in the first 10 verses of chapter 30 talks about a group of people that he said, whose fathers I would have disdained to put my sheepdogs. Well, I wouldn't have sicked my dogs on the fathers of these people now that are about me. And he goes on and describes them in those verses. And he says in verse 9, and now their sons mock me in song. I have become a byword among them. They detest me and keep their distance. They do not hesitate to spit in my face. And the question arose in my mind, what's the difference in these two groups of people? And we talked about it a little bit last week, and some of the things that was noticed that perhaps one of the differences is that these people, these that are listed in chapter 29, were folks that Job knew, although he called some of them strangers, so some of them he didn't know. Also, that maybe the difference is in how they presented themselves. Presented themselves to Job. He helped this group. And this group had nothing to give to him. They were blind, they were lame, they were widows, they were poor, they were destitute, they were victims, they were strangers. So there was nothing like, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours type deal. But yet you see a difference between the two groups of people. This group of people described in chapter 30, verses 1 through 10, the sons of these fathers that he wouldn't put his dogs on, now just openly mock him, openly spit in his face. And if you look at chapter 29 of the reputation that Job had, then in chapter 30 at how people were responding to him, it's quite a difference. And it seemed like nobody called these young folks into account for what they were doing to Job. It's not recorded if they did. And so I just kind of wondered, what's the difference between these two groups? And we started off and we noted a couple of those, and I asked you to be thinking about that. And as we move into looking at this, these were the children of, at least behaviorally speaking, the dregs of society. And in chapter 30, we're given a glimpse of what can really be a sensitive subject to talk about, and that's the power and influence of family, in particular, parents. Because it seems like the children of these nameless bunch of nobodies, which is the Good News Bible translation of verse 8 of a nameless bunch of nobodies, it's you know, these were nobodies. Their children felt like they could very well treat Job, a godly man, a good man from chapter 29, a man of reputation, that they could treat him any way, and it was all right for them to do that. So we see this, that these family members, these parents, at least these parents, perhaps other family members as well, had not instilled in these youth a respect for others. And especially in Job's case, an other who was godly and fell into suffering. And all through verses 9, all the way through verse 15, you can read that. And Job says that he has reached a situation in which they have no fear of mocking and detesting and ridiculing and making fun of him. So,
sounds like what we got going on today.
I was just going to ask that. Does that sound familiar?
It made me think of the riot in Baltimore where the black boy was out throwing stuff and his mom come out and got him and snatched him up and started wearing his head out. I thought, there's parents out there that still believe that way, but somehow it didn't get instilled into their kids.
Yeah. And it seems like that we're living in a world that almost by and large, there is a loss of respect for older folks, weak folks, sick folks, good folks, positions, just recognizing offices and positions. We with what would have been ostracized in Congress 50 years ago, now you got politicians that openly just have a great disrespect for others. And I think it's just interesting that we see that, this isn't new, but it was there in Job's time.
But Billy, don't you think, because this really got me thinking last year, it's not just out there, and this is why the key word I think is familiar, being familiar, because there's two things. Job, he knew these people, and it's just like in church. We know each other. We do and say things to each other that you would never say to somebody like at Concord or Hopeful. You'll go out and deliver something, do something like, oh, I just wished I could steal you from your church. And I'm like, oh my gosh, half the people would give it to you. Not and say, take her from our church. But that's one thing. It's because you know each other, and you lose. It's not necessarily respect, but you do. And then the other thing is even like Job talking about the people, because we've had this conversation in my family. It's all in being familiar. I warned my family, and I'm using my family as an example. Something came up local that we were to donate to, but we knew these people. We were like, I would have somebody, do you think they deserve it? Not in my group, not necessarily I don't even think it's my husband, but that. And they're like, well, do you think they deserve it? Did they work hard? What have they done? I go to Texas and give stuff to people that make these people look like saints because we don't know them. It's like at Catawba. If you know them, maybe I've heard someone say, well, we don't do as much over there at that elementary school because I don't know that they deserve it. They deserve it. But then on the other hand, somebody will blindly give stuff. There are people everywhere. It's everywhere because people are people in this there's awful people, and you can't keep mean people out, you don't judge sin. There's great people. At Catawba, there's good and great people. At Texas, there's good and bad people. But I think the difference is our degree, it's what we know, and I guess it's human nature to start judging.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hardest thing ever. And I think as you get more mature, you even step back, even in your own, like even in your own church thing, you go through a whole different process than when you were young and on fire. Not that when you made a lot of mistakes, not that it's good, bad, happy, or sad, but it's all in being familiar is the problem. And then as you get older, and way wiser than I am even now, you start thinking about, what do I do, how do I present myself, and what does God want me to do?
Yeah.
And I think that whole key has to do with everybody knowing each other.
And I think you bring out a very good point with that, because in our society, we know everything about everybody. I mean, it may not all be true, but you look at Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, all these things that people get into, and there are cameras everywhere, there are microphones everywhere, and all of that gets put out. And there can become a degree of familiarity breeding contempt. Because, oh yeah, I know him, and he ain't all that. Well, that's not necessarily the point, but that's where we go sometimes, because we seem to know so much about people that are around us. And I think that could be a point. They had seen Job, they knew him, and now they see him in this horrible situation of suffering. And like Job's 3 companions, yeah, I knew God'd get up with him after a while. I knew he couldn't be all that good. You read chapter 29, yeah, that's just a fake. See, look at him. If God loved him and he was as good as he said he was, he wouldn't be in nowhere near this type of situation. We've made a judgment. We've passed a judgment that we base upon our own perspective of situations without really utilizing the wisdom that Job talks about in chapter 28 of really thinking about, okay, what does God want me to see in this? And I think that's true. And I think that's certainly a part of that. And I think that goes right into the fact of the influence. Influence of family. When I say that, I mean families own each other. Because these were men that Job said, I wouldn't put my dogs on. Their kids are now making a mockery of me. And evidently, the parents had not instilled in their youth that sense of respect and that sense of responsibility and that sense of decency, if you will, toward other people in general. I can remember when I worked as a school social worker, this was back in the 90s, that I realized probably for the first time in my life, and I may have been there for a while, but there were families and there were parents who did not want their children to succeed above them. Now, we were raised, most of us, that, when you're growing up, you got to get an education, you got to do better. I don't want you to have to work in the cotton mill like I've worked for, But I worked with kids whose parents told them, you ain't got to listen to the teacher because I didn't do anything in school and I'm making $7.35 an hour. I'm doing good. You ain't got to listen. Kid threw pencils into the Celotex all day long. Smart kid too, smart kid. But his family had told him, you don't need to listen. And that just goes on and spreads out into life to where, I don't have to listen to anybody in position, anybody in authority. I don't have to respect other people. My family didn't, and they seemed to be doing okay, even though half of them might be in prison and half of them, whatever. I work with those kids too. But the power of families, and it is touchy. I can sense an unease in just talking about this, and for no particular reason, I guess, except for the fact that it's just uncomfortable to think about. What are we instilling in our youth of respect for things that we may not have a lot of respect for. If we don't have a lot of respect for, then our children are going to have even less respect for those same things. And it's just, and I'm good for opening up a can of worms, so,
Well, and you can be a good influence and then the world makes that influence.
Yeah.
It's just out the door because they're going to do,
yeah,
they're going to be with what their peers and,
yeah. Yeah, and that's one of the main points I think that comes out of this section in chapter 30, is that, these people who were dregs and all this, they may not have been poor. They may have had some substance in life, some money. Just because you are disadvantaged, to use a term that we hear all the time today, doesn't mean that you are a dreg of society. And just because you have substance or wealth doesn't mean that you are a good and great and wonderful person. I think that's one of the points that comes out of this. Being disadvantaged doesn't mean one is a dog, nor the fact that one acts like a wild dog is disadvantaged, because that's how Job describes it as he talks in these first 8 verses of chapter 30. And one of the things that has really impressed this upon my mind, we actually now have a legal defense for a person acting like an animal. You know what that's called?
influenza.
Well, no.
Affluenza.
Yeah, it's close, yeah. Affluenza. Yeah. There's lawyers who defended a person for doing some kind of crime, I can't remember what. Drunk driving and killed somebody. He didn't know better because he'd been raised rich. Now, for all that somebody who was really rich may not know of how the rest of us live, that's still no excuse. You still have a mind, and the only reason that you would agree to even have that defense is that you have chosen to be willfully blind to what life is really like. And
I think it goes both ways. You can say I was so poor that I didn't know
there you
anything.
go. Yeah.
I was so rich I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Both of them are bad excuses.
Both of them are bad excuses. And Solomon talks about that in the book of Proverbs. He says, don't give me so much money that I'll become arrogant, and don't let me be so poor that I will despise others and think that I have a right to take from you because for whatever circumstances in life, I don't have what you have. And I think that goes back also to the influence of families. How do we help our kids to understand the values between wealth and poverty, between what is really advantaged and what is really disadvantaged? What is a really disadvantaged person? And yes you can, but can you have dignity even though being poor? I remember growing up in Chatham, Virginia. We didn't go to town often. And of course, Chatham was much bigger than Maiden is now. But when you went to town, you dressed up. Remember that? Anybody old enough to remember? You put a white shirt on, you put your dress pants on. You didn't go to town looking sloppy. Even as a kid, you didn't do this. Why? Because you were in town. We had a whole 3,000 people living in that town. We were big shots if you lived in town,
Did you have a Woolworths?
Have a what?
A Woolworths?
Wards?
Woolworths, W-O-L.
Oh, Woolworths. No, we didn't. We had it in Danville.
Okay.
Yeah, in Danville. Of course, Danville that was 20 miles away. You never went to Danville. That was forever away. But we had we had a Kresge, and I worked at a Mick or Mac grocery store. I think there was only a couple of those in Virginia. I don't know where they're probably gone now, but and we had a Leggett's department, not Belt Leggett. We had a Leggett department store. All that. But you dressed up because you wanted to be presented as, I'm not just a poor country bumpkin. So you dressed up. If you look at the old films of ball games back in the 30s and 40s and stuff, everybody wore suits, which I think is a little extreme, but everybody wore suits to a ball game. They had hats on and white, ties, all this. It was just that people wanted to give a presentation that we were not less. Even if I didn't have anything, if I'm going to be around you, I don't want to appear that I'm less than you are. And I think that's something that, people who do experience a lot of suffering, poverty, disadvantage, it's something that still needs to be placed to our children, to our young folks. That even though you're raised poor, you have nothing, you can still have dignity. Because as Job talks about in chapter 28, wisdom is not something you dig up out of the earth. Dignity is not something that you get because you've got a huge bank account. Dignity is who you are as you navigate life with each other. And that takes the wisdom of fearing God, of being able to do that. I think it's just interesting as we look at this section of Scripture. Other points or comments on this before we move on?
I think his prosperity is the biggest difference in, 12 through 17 and chapter 30. He has it, and I think how people choose to respond to him based on his wealth then versus nothing now.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure some people are thinking, well, the consequences of what you've done, just
Mhm.
like the rest of the people,
Yeah.
his friends.
Yeah. Yeah, we enjoy seeing a rich man fall. We enjoy seeing rich people have a problem. That was the whole basis of Dynasty, Falcon's Crest, the Ewans, and whatever programs they have on now. Rich people having problems. We just love it. Because we think, you think you're so great and wonderful because you have a lot.
Well, I think it's even more elementary than that. When I look at chapter 3, I'm like, misery loves company. Here I am just wallowing in it. Now Job's there too. Woo!
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let me take it out on him. Yeah, and I think that's part of it. I think it is. It's just interesting as you look at the contrast between these two groups of people, because they could very well have been, as far as economically, very much the same. But their behavior, their decision on what to do in their circumstance made all the difference between being a wild dog and dreg of society and being one that, is worthy of help.
What you do with what you got, whether you got lot or none, it's what you allow God to flow through
Yeah,
you
exactly.
to other people.
Yeah. And Paul never had anything, and he was a little short Jewish man that probably had a bad eye problem that caused his eyes to run pus, and he was an ugly thing to look at, and he had been beaten, shipwrecked, all these other things. He was not, he wasn't this blonde Adonis that you see on a fragrance commercial on TV. He was one of the folks that most people say, well, you don't even want to go look at him, much less hear him talk. But God made the difference in him. And when he was weak, he was strong. And it's just being able to help all of us to understand, and our children to understand, and our families to understand, that it's not your station in life. It's who you are in whatever station you are in life that's important. And to be able to have dignity and have a relationship with God, and God move and flow through you, that can make, a world of difference.
I feel like it's a fine line to walk in that we
Yeah.
have great value because of the one that lives in us. We are great because of
Yeah.
it. But to make sure that's
has value. I feel like every day when I go pick Reed up at Vandy's, I am like, if y'all ever pass me, I'm going like this at him. Because he says, and I want y'all to, he, you think he's raised in a Christian family, surely. He said something the other day that I literally, if I would have reached over and smacked him, y'all, that I would have done it. About this kid that I know of his family, and yeah, these circumstances go, and he goes, we were going, and I said, oh, I know that. And he goes, oh yeah, and I'll be honest with you, oh, he's a loser, he's a fan. I about come out of my car. And I'm like, all that we do, and I am on him constantly, and I went through the whole thing. His mother's a single mother, done real good, goes to a Christian church. How dare you say that about him? And I said, I know you think that's cool, that you're in with the cool crowd, but that happened like 4 times in the last 2 weeks. And I literally do not know what to do about it. I go from extreme that I'm going to take everything away from him. And then I'm like, he'll talk about getting a car. And then I'll say, well, if you make A's, well, he's making A's. And then I feel like saying, well, you're not getting a car anyway, because I just don't like you. But I just don't know, and that is so hard.
How many times have I been there and said that?
I don't know what to do with this boy. And he thinks he is such a good kid. Even out in school, he's a good kid. He's very shy. It's my middle one. He's such a good kid. But on the other hand, he's so awful. And I don't know, he's driving me. But see, in my thing, now at my age, I don't really care. I do care about the age he's got to go to college, but I don't care as much personally. I don't know what I'm going to do to make him a good person. I pray for him. Then I worry, am I doing more for like these kids in Texas, my own family, not to yours, but I don't know what families are going to do to get their kids not to do that. I'm making him go to Caswell. And I'm just praying that Matt can do something that 1 week. I got a whole lot going on that 1 week. But no, and that sounds funny, but I don't know.
Yeah.
We talk about family. I don't know what to do about that. We're both talking about that. And he's what people would consider a good kid. Mm-hmm. And he's awful, and I don't know what to do.
And part of that is going to be experiencing life. Because we all have that human nature within us, and it's carnal by birth. And it does like to promote ourselves over others. Even if, when you get down to the brass tacks of it, they would say, oh, well, yeah, I know. But it still feels good to us to promote ourselves over others. And as teenagers, that's just, it's a part of that teenage insanity.
I would say we were in a similar situation to what she's talking about, and just being frustrated to no end.
Shot call. Give you a shot call.
No, we did not do that.
You might want to delete some of this off the tape before it gets out to the public,
I'm Scott Townsend, and I said shot call.
But at one point, our child had an issue with a physically challenged child, and I was at the point, what do we do? We have told you, we have explained, we have tried our best to say those are the people you stand up for. A long story short, with prayer and with just some guidance, his punishment was to be immersed with special needs. And I mean immersed, meaning hours each day through the school system. I was impressed that the principal allowed us to
Pulling
do
him
it.
out of feed and making him go.
Yeah, and well, we're gonna scratch that too, but he came home every day begging to be removed out of that class. And my nephews told their mother, said, Levi's been moved to special needs.
He's riding a short bus. That's the phrase. He rides the short bus.
It was one of those really hard moments, and I said, this is a 3-month process, buddy. This is nothing short of that. And I don't want to, because it's very emotional. But there came a moment he came home and he was still begging to get out of class like 2 weeks later. sometimes being immersed and being surrounded by people that you have a hard time facing can do a lot.
Yeah, it gets past the surface of what things are, and you finally see the person that is really there. And the disabled is a great example of how that, because there's a lot of people that, you know, they just cringe and get away. They can't handle it because they can't see.
Levi would gag.
We were somewhere eating one time, and there was a whole table of a meeting, you know, different food would come out of their mouth, and people try to help them eat. He said, I can't do this, I can't sit here now. I said, you're going to sit here, you're going to eat. I said, you don't have to look at it, but you're going to face it. I mean, you know, sometimes you don't like the smell of food, you got to get it in the water in it, you know. And that's basically what we did.
And I think it's a great conversation that we're having with this, as even as much as it brings up uncomfortable thoughts and problems that we're facing with children. I remember my youngest daughter in school, and I think I've related this to you. When she was in elementary school, there was a young lady who was on crutches and wheelchair at time, and she really tried to help her. And this little girl hated her for that. Tried to shove her down a long step of iron stairs outside of the building one day. And this is 5th grade. And the reason I share that with you is that she went to a elementary school reunion here about a year ago. And I asked her, I said, did you see, and I don't even know what the girl's name was. She said, oh yeah, I saw her. Came up, talked to her. She's still as mean now as she was when she was a kid. And just, you know, snappy answers, just a bitter person. And I think it's a good conversation now because, one, it helps us to see that, yeah, we do have this carnal side of us that likes to project ourselves over others. And that's part of the problem. It was here and today. And there are things that we have to sometimes be really intentional in helping our kids and our family members to see past just what is the mask or the face of a situation, to see someone inside. And then sometimes they never get the point. Like this little girl that my daughter saw 30-some years later. She still ain't got the point.
To me, when you do immerse yourself in that, you have some more compassion. You are feeling how they felt.
Yeah.
I mean, he could, at that point in time, he could come home and say, Mom, this kid I know don't ever touch his shoulders because he'll wig out.
Mm-hmm.
Or this kid just loves to be on me, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a part of that, I mean, you even talking about skipping the whole thing about special needs and moving on to another subject, or someone that's just ill, just sickly, you know, it gives you compassion for that person.
Yeah, and I think one of the benefits out of my heart attack is that I have understood trauma, acute trauma, and some of the effects that it happens to others and so forth. I have a little more personal experience with that now. And I think at some point in time, what I have had happen to me is going to be beneficial in my helping somebody else who either has or faces an acute trauma. Not that mine is like PTSD in Iraq or Iran, nothing like that, but I can understand that a little better, and how some of the side effects of having a trauma, like this morning, and I'm having to touch things here because if I don't, my hands are going to shake. And it's because I got upset about trying to get some things done that I wanted to do this morning. And I didn't have time to do them because it didn't get started fast enough. And where usually I would say, oh, well, you know, that's just, you know, it was stupid. Next time, start a little earlier. This morning, and you can ask my wife, I got short of breath. I got tight in my chest. My hands are shaking. And I hadn't done anything physical. It was emotional. And I'm trying to process this through my head, thinking, okay, now, you know, you need to understand this. And at the same time, people who have suffered trauma have some of those same effects afterwards. Things that to normal folks, normal in that sense, who haven't experienced an acute trauma, would just overlook and think, okay, what's the big deal? As my wife said, Billy, tomorrow, who's going to know anything about this and who's going to care? I said, well, I will. She said, well, you just need to get over it. But to someone who's experienced trauma, that doesn't happen easily. I will spend the better part of today trying to get over something that I couldn't even explain why it's a big deal this morning. And that's a result of trauma. To be able to understand that in somebody else can be helpful, rather than just passing a judgment.
Billy, she may need to get you a shot collar. You go into that little...
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm fine.
Yeah, she done took her white hat off. She done took her nurse's cap off weeks ago, so she might be getting ready to give me a shot collar.
Billy, I think what makes, to speak to Debbie's point, as a Christian parent that does want your children to do better than you, we want them to get A's, and we want them to succeed in athletics, and we want them to be class president. We want them to, but sometimes I think that we forget to communicate to them, for them to know in their heart that as much as we want those things to them to do those things, that's not the important thing. It's the person that they are.
Yeah.
And like I still communicate to my grown kids, it's the man or the woman that you've become. It's not what you do or haven't done. Great, those accomplishments are wonderful. We're proud of you. You're very lucky that you could do that.
Yeah.
But that's not the most important thing.
And it's a process of life before we can actually realize that we're getting
I
close
was guilty of it. I'm that mama that's, my kids laugh at me, because I'm there, the homework,
Yeah, I understand you're Miss 4-0 yourself. I'm not going to tell you who said that, but his name begins with Ricky. Rick, But yeah, we in trying to help our kids reach a place that if you run into a Job, just because he is suffering, because he's lost everything, and because it looks like he deserves it, don't just respond based upon what it looks like. And that requires the wisdom of chapter 28. That requires the wisdom of 28 to do that.
And Bill, my kids are about their own, hallelujah, amen. But,
Tail lights, prettiest lights in the world, I'm telling you.
but, they watched me. They
Yeah.
heard every word I said.
Mhm.
I'm confident there are many things I should have never said,
Oh,
and things that I should not have done in their presence or period. And they see those things. Doesn't matter what I tell them.
yeah.
They see and hear who I really am.
They watch me too.
Yeah, they watch us all, and I think it goes back to that thing, the influence of families. We teach our kids so very much without saying a word to them about what we're trying to teach them. And we have to have some age and some wisdom in us before we realize that, oh, man, I really should have handled that differently. I really should have handled that better. I really should have gone this direction instead of that direction. And then we see it repeated in our children, and we jump all over them, and they say, well, sometimes they'll say, well, remember, I saw you do so-and-so. And they're right,
Billy, you just made a statement that just kind of clicked with me. They watch us all.
Yeah.
Back in our day, the scope of people that we could watch was like this. Now it's the whole world. I'm entitled to this. Black Lives Matter. I'm gay. I want equal rights. All of this stuff. And you go on, I have the utmost respect for the office of the President of the United States. lunatic over there on the end just throw up his hands and say, this is crazy. What are we doing? And the rest of them are just happy to beat each other up and tell lies. Well, back when I was a kid, you think I watched any of that stuff? No. It wasn't even on. No. But now you've got college kids. Frontal lobes aren't even fully developed. They can't make good decisions. They're watching this stuff. They're watching Bernie Sanders. They're watching Hillary Clinton. They're watching these people that are way up here and allowing them to influence their lives. We as Christians stand back when the gay rights movement come along, and there's just a few of them. I think the greasy wheel or the noisy wheel gets the grease, and look where we're at now. Do I think these people want equal rights? No, they want preferential treatment, and our kids are seeing that, and not only are they seeing that, they're seeing how we react to that. And,
It's not always good, is it?
Yeah, no, not always good. Yeah. We have some.
The scary thing is they can vote. There's 21-year-olds without their phone.
Yeah.
Our child being well.
It's not political, I didn't mean to turn into a political thing, but it's just everything that goes on politically.
They do.
All this stuff that, I remember when I was a kid, if I said something as ridiculous as poop,
Mm-hmm.
man, that bar of soap was crammed in my mouth. I got my mouth washed out and I'm going, well, the cat pooped, or whatever it was. But now, you've got the kids are saying stuff that's worse than that, and we've just become where it doesn't bother us anymore.
Desensitized to it.
Desensitized.
Yeah. And I think, and we're not going to solve all this in this class, but I think it's interesting to have the conversation and recognize that we have this responsibility to project the wisdom that is talked about in chapter 28 and see an example of that in chapter 29 and try to avoid having our kids or our family members, the people that we do have influence over, responding like the group in chapter 30, verses 1 through 15, really. So I think it's an interesting conversation to have that, and the fact that this happened thousands of years ago means that it's not new. It's a part of that carnality that is in all of us, and that we have to daily struggle with to walk in the Spirit rather than walking in the flesh, as Paul talks about in Galatians 5. Excellent conversation, good discussion. We'll keep going next week. I'm past my time already. Grab some coffee, grab one of those sweet cakes, eat it during church, irritate somebody. See, I'm giving you an influence right there, you know what I'm saying? So